I now call Deputy John Lyons. 8 minutes left.
Okay, thank you, Las Ciancorla. Good afternoon, Minister. I'm actually delighted to speak on the Education Training Board's bill today. It's an area, obviously, that I was part of while I was a member of the Oireachtas Committee on Social Protection, Education and Jobs, but obviously since then I've now gone on to work with the Committee on Jobs instead. But actually, in fact, the work that we do on the Committee on Jobs, Innovation, Enterprise is intrinsically linked to what some of the effects of this bill will bring in today. I want to just speak on two particular points of this bill, and that is the issue of reform and the reform agenda that's going on within the Department of Education. And then the other aspect of the bill that I'd really like to concentrate on is the provision of further education and training, and the importance of this in the context of where we're at the moment, particularly in relation to unemployment within our country. Just on the reform agenda, I suppose today's Education Training Board bill is another step in what is a litany of steps that is taking place within the Department of Education. There is a pure spring cleaning going on within the policies that make up the Department of Education at the moment, and are looking at what's best practice and what do we need to do to change and make ourselves, as the Minister said himself, fit for purpose for the future. You did say yourself, Minister, one of the quotes was that, these changes within the Education Training Board's bill is about enhancing learning. And I totally agree with you. And I do want to commend you just on a couple of the other reforms that have taken place. And sometimes people think, maybe people who might watch this, hopefully somebody who might watch what's going on today outside of here, and hopefully some of the deputies around are watching what's going on inside of here. But this is actually real reform. And if you actually stop for like 10 seconds and try and understand what does reform mean and what reforms are going on through the legislative process of bringing in this new bill, there are quite radical changes happening to our education system because of this. And I will be speaking about a couple of those where I think they're quite good. But I do want to commend you on, and unfortunately I won't be around on the particular day that the junior cert is going to be spoken about in the Dáil. I'd love to speak on it, somebody as a secondary school teacher. It's warmly welcomed and overdue, and I'm delighted that you're doing something about that. I know SOLAS is coming down the road, and this will work in tangent with the Education Training Board bill. In fairness, it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, really. This Education Training Board's bill is just one part of a jigsaw of a suite that will overhaul the way education at all levels is delivered in Ireland, which will ultimately affect the individual and, of course, their employability factor. But I do want to highlight one thing that, it's 70 years ago since the Beveridge Report was introduced into the United Kingdom. And for anybody who's familiar with the Beveridge Report, it was out of the Beveridge Report that came the likes of the NHS, the National Health Service, which is something that we ourselves are trying to introduce here, Universal Health Insurance Scheme in Ireland. So out of challenging times, 70 years ago, World War II, 1942, out of challenging times when things are difficult, good decisions can be made. And I think the Education and Training Board's bill is something that's coming during a challenging time, but the fruit of it we will see in time. Just moving on to the main part of it, which is, as I said, I'm quite familiar with the heads of the bill. And in fairness, Minister, you did something which is quite new in here. As a committee, we saw the heads of the bill and were able to discuss the heads of the bill before it actually came on the floor at second stage. So it was actually a great privilege to be able to be part of, I suppose, composing more than the heads of the bill. And obviously we had a number of people in from the VEC and other sectors who had concerns around what way this bill should go. But I think the most important part of the bill for me is the part that talks about the provision of education and training, and that needs to meet the challenges of the workplace today. And I am really, really concerned about that. And I know SOLAS is the body that will be set up, but the reality is it's the ETBs which will actually oversee the delivery of the training and education, which we are relying on to upskill, to make sure that their employability factor in this modern age is going to make sure that they're a step closer to the world of work. So that means that we only have one shot to get this service right. It was 1930s when we last did something under the ETBs with the Vocational Education Act. Now, over 70 years onwards, we're doing some 80 years onwards, excuse me, we're introducing the Education and Training Board's bill. And I can imagine It'll be after all of our lifetimes before we see the next change to that. So I think it's really, really important that we get the composition of this right, Minister. And I do hope with all the services that will be the case. But just one example in relation to the education and training section of that I want to kind of bring in. You know, as people would know, I'm a secondary school teacher. I say I am. I think you're always a teacher. You might leave it, but you're still involved in the whole teaching. And I value what education means. And for me, education just isn't about getting somebody a job. I mean, I understand the intrinsic values that education brings to somebody's life. And as you said yourself, education is the great liberator. It allows people to move to a different place in their lives that they would never been able to be in the first place. I see my own self as an example of that. But given the constraints of the current economic crisis that we're in right now, I think what needs to be centre stage in the delivery of further education and training is the employability factor that that course will offer to the person who gets involved in it. And the ETBs have a really a strong role in this. And Minister, I've said this to you before, in order to make sure that that employability factor in the further education training sector is there, we need to say goodbye to the courses like ECDL.
Just 2 minutes remaining.
We do need to have a proper audit of the courses there. Just on the composition of the boards, it is with regret, Minister, that there isn't actually a designated, nominated business person on the board. I think that would have been crucial. Although they can be nominated as one of the 4 nominations that can go on. It's a pity that they're not one of the designated ones, because I think if we are to be truly successful with integrating education and training into the world of work, we have to be at the pulse of what's happening in industry, and the best people to tell us that is industry. And I think they would have been able to guide us in a way that nobody within the Department of Education, or possibly even in here, could do, with no disrespect to anybody. And just one good example of where there's a model of practice that does that well, where they have invited industry to be the pulse of where they go, is FIT, which is actually funded through the Department of Education. You know, they have a 70% job progression rate out of anybody who does a course with them. And they are constantly, because their board is made up of the IBMs, the Intels and so on of this world, they're constantly addressing the needs of industry and developing courses along with the VEC to meet those needs. And the results speaks for itself. 7 out of 10 people who do those courses end up within 2 years gaining full-time employment. So I think there is a lesson to be learned there. And I suppose, Minister, people need to have faith. I'm conscious I'm coming to the end of my time, last Count Corla. People need to have faith, and we all have anecdotal evidence of how people haven't had faith in the systems that have been there to date. Unfortunately, dare I mention it, but FOSS. I mean, I know of somebody who went only a while ago, an unemployed electrician, and the only course he was offered was a course in a forklift driving. And really, his employability factor wasn't going to change that much because of that. You know, we need to invest in career paths. And I know when all the jigsaw pieces come together, the solace, the one-stop shop, the ETBs that we're talking here today, that they all involve giving a career path to people to ensure that people are going to be closer to the world of work when they finish this, if not gaining a job straight away. So, Minister, just to finish up, I see the last Count Corla making gestures at me to start there. I welcome this legislation. It really is real reform, and we have to stop and think about that, because it is. And I admire the aims that are in it. And along with the other reforms, Minister, although we may disagree on things at sometimes, I have to say I completely support all the reforms you've brought in to date, and I look forward to future reforms within the Department of Education.
Deputy Michael Healy-Ray.
Much less